unmute you. Can you hear her now?
Hello?
Yeah. I can hear.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Susan?
I can't hear you guys.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. we
Okay.
can.
No.
Do it again.
Good morning. I'm Dwight Keene. I'm the chair of the Kansas Corporation Commission. I'm joined this morning by fellow commissioners Susan Duffy and Commissioner Andrew French. At this time, I will call to order this meeting of the Kansas Corporation Commission on this 24th day of February 2022. Commissioners, before us, the first matter is up for consideration of 14 items on the consent agenda. You've had the opportunity to review the draft orders in each of these dockets before us. So I would at this time ask if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and I'll begin with Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you. I have no questions or comments.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner French.
I have no questions about the consent agenda items and would move approval of the consent agenda.
I second the motion.
Then moved and seconded, we approve the consent agenda. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. Next item for our consideration is the one noticed item for this morning. It's docket number 22-EPDE-365-TAR. It's in the matter of the application of the Empire District Electric Company, Liberty Utilities, for the ad valorem tax surcharge rider tariff adjustment for 2022 annual true up. Before us this morning is an order approving the ad valorem tax surcharge rider, and our presenter is Hassan Latif. Good morning, Hassan.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. The order before you approves Empire District Electric Company's request to update its ad valorem tax surcharge. The 2022 property tax surcharge totals $387,830, which is a decrease of $19,666 from the surcharge rider approved last year, which was last year's surcharge rider was a total of $407,496. Staff reviewed the ad valorem tax statements provided by Empire and determined they matched the amounts claimed in its application. Staff predicted the cost of the decrease based on the average usage for customers over previous years. Assuming that residential customers in Kansas use 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, Empire's proposed ad valorem tax surcharge rider would decrease their bill by 11 cents per month or $1.32 annually compared to last year's surcharge rider. The total impact for 2022 would be $1.64 per month or $19.68 annually. Staff recommends approval of the requested ad valorem tax surcharge subject to two conditions. First is that staff will ensure the annual true-up amounts collected versus the amount actual amount of the increase or reduction in ad valorem taxes will be reflected in the calculation of the 2023 ad valorem tax surcharge. And second, staff asks that Empire be required to file its ad valorem tax surcharge rider annual true-up in January of each calendar year. With those stipulations, staff recommends approval of this order, and I'm available to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Hassan. Commissioners, any questions, comments, or concerns? I'll begin with Commissioner French.
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Duffy.
I have no questions. I move approval of the order as described.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the order in this noticed item. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The order is approved. Thank you very much, Hassan.
Thank you.
The next matter up on our agenda is a discussion item. We have a quarterly update on the Southwest Power Pool activities, and we're grateful to have with us again this morning former Chair and Commissioner Sherry Feist-Albrecht, who is our liaison to the SPP and an SPP work group consultant. Sherry, I see your screen sharing. Are you there?
I am. Do I need to make it full screen? Trying to figure out. Are you saying?
It might help if you could, Sherry, if that would work for you.
Sherry, just hit F5 on your keyboard and that should start the slideshow in full screen.
Okay. I hit F5. Did it do anything?
No, I don't see that. So you can also go up to the slideshow menu on the top menu bar. Or I'm sorry, slideshow. And then click on that.
I
And then
did.
there's a from beginning over on the very far left.
Gotcha.
There.
That's it.
All right.
Sherry, if you would, please.
Yes, Chair Keen, Commissioners, thank you, Denise, for that technical assistance. I will get started. This is a report, a presentation on that follows up on the quarterly meetings that occurred at the end of January for SPP, and I'll start with RSC. Let's see. The RSC met on January 24th, starting with an educational session, which was primarily composed of updates on various activities and updates from commissioners with respect to work groups that they're particularly involved with, like Regional Allocation Rate Review Task Force, IRATE, CPPTF, et cetera. And all those acronyms are described in full throughout this presentation. So I apologize for that shortcut, which was followed up in the afternoon with a business meeting, which lasted only about an hour. So it was very brief, a couple of voting items, which we'll describe later. And then there was a joint stakeholder meeting also in that afternoon. And we'll follow with the board meeting members committee activities, actions taken at that meeting as we proceed. The voting items on the RSC agenda included approving the auditor costs for the 2021 RSC audit. That was just acted on unanimously. There was a final vote on two items that are revision requests, which means that they proposed tariff language to tariff changes that will have to be filed at FERC. The first of which you've heard about many times. It's referred to as the Holistic Integrated Tariff Team C2 Byway Cost Allocation Initiative. It basically changes the provisions of Attachment J, provides a waiver for costs. This was something that had gone up to FERC. Had been rejected with instructions to develop some criteria, came back to COG and the RSC. COG worked on developing 3 criteria, which we've discussed previously. And then the RSC, this was their opportunity to vote on it, and it did pass. And I'll get into that a little bit later slide with more detail. Then we also addressed the HITT C4, which is storage as a transmission only asset. This was the recommendation coming out of the HITT process as well. The other activities that occurred at RSC included a cost allocation working group update, SEAMS Liaison Committee update, and an IRATF update report. With regard to HITT C2, this is the history. You've seen portions of this slide before, but what's important about this is that COG developed these 3 criteria: a capacity criteria, a flow criteria, criterion, and then a cost benefit related criterion. This was presented to the RSC. COG had voted on this previously, and the vote at the RSC reflected essentially the vote that was made at COG. It was a 7-4 vote in both places. It was approved to place the waiver criteria into the tariff, and those RSC members voting no were from Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas.
Sherry, do you know the rationale behind why they voted no?
Actually, I don't. I'm trying to recall if I have that in this slide. The Texas commissioner placed his comments on the record. And it basically has to do with, this provides a waiver process for the highway byway cost allocation. And it could affect new projects, but it's primarily designed to address the remaining annual transmission revenue requirement for existing projects that meet these criteria. And I think the concern is that this potentially provides a precedent for multiple waivers going forward. I think the other concern is that it's, I believe as he stated in his comments, that it could be discriminatory. So, because
Oh, sorry, Shara.
Oh, no, go
Maybe
ahead.
maybe this is where you were going, actually. I think I appreciated, he was pretty direct in saying, just frankly, I think within Texas, they didn't see any facilities that they thought would be eligible for this waiver. And so they didn't see any benefit. They thought it could be used to reallocate costs regionally that would flow to some other states otherwise, but it couldn't be used to the benefit of their customers. If that may have been where you were going with that, Sherry.
yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. So that's the essence of that.
Thank you.
Sure.
When is this effective?
Well, it depends on when the SPP files the revision request. The board of directors did vote on this initiative and it passed. And so that leaves it in the hands of SPP staff to make the filing at FERC. I'm not sure what the time frame for that filing is.
So it has to go through FERC's approval process again. They
Yes,
denied it the first time. Now we've established the 3 criteria. And so they need to act again, which means could take some time still.
right.
And it's
And
not retroactive, correct?
no, it's not retroactive. It's prospective only. And once it's filed at FERC, there's still the opportunity for a protest to be filed. So it could go through the similar process as it did last time. Well,
And to be clear, even if FERC approves it, it just creates a waiver process. It doesn't automatically do anything. It creates a process where then an entity could come forward and ask that certain facility costs be reallocated on a region-wide basis, but they would have to go through that process then to make that happen. So nothing will happen in the very short term.
Right. And not to belabor this, but I thought Oklahoma had been a yes vote at one time.
no,
Never. Okay. All
no.
right. Thank you.
Why is my slide not advancing? There we go, got it. HITT C4 is storage as a transmission only asset. It incorporates COG's recommendations for changes to the tariff. It requires these assets to be registered as market storage resources in an integrated marketplace to provide some accounting for injections and withdrawals from the system. They do not participate in the economic dispatch of the market and only receive charges and credits for the energy and any overcollected losses. This is a revision request that involved other work groups for other aspects, for some of the more technical aspects of utilizing storage as transmission only assets. The COG and RSC only looked at the cost allocation components of this. It was unanimously approved by the RSC, and it was also approved by the board. And it, like HITT C2, this one the filing will be made by SPP staff at FERC. I don't know when that will be filed. And then I think the implementation, I don't recall what the implementation timeframe is on this, but that'll have to go through the FERC approval process. It was modeled largely after a FERC-approved MISO, a similar FERC-approved MISO process. So hopefully it will proceed without much disruption going forward. The RSC meeting was followed by a joint stakeholder meeting, which is where the board and the members and RSC kind of meet together. It's an opportunity to receive reports that don't have to be done multiple times to multiple bodies. So it's kind of a meeting efficiency step. And this was essentially the agenda for the stakeholder briefing. And I will go through several of these in more detail on the upcoming slides, but this just gives you a sense of those joint presentations and how much overlap there is between what RSC is doing and what the board is doing. IRATF is the improved resource availability task force that was formed following the winter weather event, and the comprehensive report that came out of that event that recognized that there were 4 tier 1 recommendations, 2 for fuel assurance and 2 for resource planning and availability. IRATF reports to the board, to RSC as appropriate, and the staff is involved. There have been a number of sub-initiatives under each of these 4 categories of recommendations, these tier 1 recommendations, to help guide the work of SPP staff on doing some data and research, data development, research, etc. And most of our meetings since the beginning of IRATF have involved kind of fine tuning some of the scopes as they've gone through, as staff has gone through and looked at some of the data available and some of the research that they're doing. They've seen ways to revise the scope. There have been inputs from IRATF members to likewise refine some of those initiative scopes. And so we've been doing a lot of work on that. A lot of the work of the IRATF, as you can imagine, revolves around issues of reliability of the system, adequacy of supply. And so those groups are directly involved for their expertise in developing some of the data, some of the input and recommendations that we're taking a look at, as well as the market groups and the cost allocation working group. And there's quite a bit of, there are, Ted Thomas is the RSC member who chairs IRATF, and there are 4 COG members among the members of IRATF. And then the remainder are made up of either market group representatives. I think we have 1 market group representative, 1 operating reliability representative, and 3 or 4 supply adequacy representatives. So it's it crosses a lot of several important working groups in terms of addressing winter weather event issues. I put a link here for the status report. They're doing monthly reports. I don't know, hopefully this link will work. If not, you can copy and paste it into your browser. You should be able to go directly to that page if you want to see some of the detail of the work that's going on. Of the 26 tier 1 initiatives that we have 17 that are currently under study and being actively discussed, 7 that haven't been started, and then 2 have been completed. One of which was a letter that went out to gas pipeline operators to inform them that they're susceptible to power outages and caused by other events that aren't necessarily controlled by the transmission operators, and to encourage them to be prepared for such losses of service. And then another initiative involves completing a listing of the utility scale resources, just to show which ones are participating in the market, which ones are not, what's available for energy emergencies, to get a better handle on just what resources are available for energy emergencies. Seems Liaison Committee really hasn't met, I don't believe, since November. So I provided this update. It happened since the end of January, just this earlier this week, but they have been working. There's a rate pancaking working group that has been working on the issue of rate pancaking, and they had issued some surveys, and they received 9 responses back from SPP stakeholders, 11 from MISO stakeholders, and they worked through the survey results, and they recommended that SPP work with MISO in SPP and MISO in several areas to reduce rate pancaking on the seam. I'm trying to see. I have some notes, I thought, but I don't know if I can see them. And one of them had to do with needing gosh, let me see if I can recall what they were. Anyway, I believe there was a directive given to the executive director of the organization of MISO states to develop a more a list of options, and then provide some straw proposals for them to act on. As I recall, the areas for improvement were rather general, and I think they wanted a little bit more detail, flesh put on those bones. But there's concerns about I'll have to just get that information to you separately. I'm not recalling that off the top of my head.
Sherry, I just wanted to make a brief comment on this. I was in and out of that meeting, but tried to listen to as much as I could. But this is an area that I'm starting to get more interested in and concerned about. And perhaps I should have been more concerned all along. But as you said, I think some of the rate pancaking that's going on it's very general. It's the fact that you would have to pay for network service in both on both systems, or that folks are paying for point-to-point service on both systems. And it seems to me that there are some really fundamental barriers to making transactions happen across the seam. And so while I think we've rightly focused on improving the connectivity between the regions, I know that was certainly the focus of a lot of our comments in the FERC advance notice of proposed rulemaking docket. My bigger concern now is that even if we are able to improve that connectivity between the regions and make that happen and available in times of emergencies, it still probably is not going to solve the problem of actually making transactions happen in normal times when you don't have sort of extreme market pricing signals forcing power across the seam. And so, yeah, I am seeing this work as just extremely important to try to figure out a way to let power flow more freely and to let economic benefits basically flow more freely between the regions. I think that long term is something that's going to have to be solved, and it's going to have to be solved from a rate mechanism standpoint, probably. So I don't know that I'm asking a question there as much as in listening to the conversation, have just come to the realization that this is a transmission planning problem, but we also do have a rate mechanism problem that's probably going to prevent transactions from occurring.
But if I could, it sounds like, Commissioner French, that this would be affecting all RTOs and all seams. And so it's kind of like when you leave one country and go to the next, you're paying a duty tax but I would agree. I think this is maybe where there's a lot of like the rate pancaking going on and could be really exorbitant once you start peeling back the layers. And then how do you mitigate that? But I think this is a large issue that is beyond us. So shouldn't FERC be assisting in this?
Yes, yes. I mean, I think that's something we probably need to push them to look at even more. I mean, FERC has been involved and they have a general policy against rate pancaking, but it is allowed in some senses. And I think that's what this Seams Liaison Committee, and Sherry, you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what this Seams Liaison Committee is trying to get their hands around, is where does rate pancaking still exist? And I guess what I'm beginning to learn is that it still exists pretty extensively between the regions, and we would have to have some pretty fundamental changes if we actually want transactions to freely flow between the regions. But Sherry, if you have anything to add to that, feel free.
No, it is. It's one of the barriers that we identified earlier in the Seams Liaison Committee process. And I think there were quite a few, and when we first got going on this issue of the Seams Liaison and identifying the issues that we wanted further information about, this was one of the ones that we solicited comments from stakeholders on that got quite a bit of response, which I think is why the Seams Liaison Committee created the advisory group, to make sure that they got those stakeholders available to have a free flow exchange of ideas, so that the Seams Liaison Committee members could get a better sense of where these rate pancaking issues were along the seam, because they are a barrier to that more efficient flow across the seam. So that work is going to be ongoing. I wasn't able to attend the meeting this week, but I did review the meeting materials, and I know that there was some direction that was given to come back with some straw proposals. And so I don't know. The recommendation from the rate pancaking group was they thought their work was done and that they could be dissolved. Now, I don't know if the SLC agreed with that or not having participated in the meeting. So I don't know if it will continue in existence, or if this becomes, at this point, an SLC issue to work with SPP and MISO on.
Yeah, I did hear some of that discussion, and I think there was a there was a sentiment that they were done. But yeah, I don't know that there was a disagreement that we have maybe finished inventorying, but the SLC certainly did not think we were done taking action on this, that, okay, now we need to solve the problem. So, and I'm more there than I probably ever have been, that I think this has absolutely got to be tackled. And I want to also just point out that Sherry should take some credit here, that I believe you were a charter member of the Seams Liaison Committee and really jump-started this work and understood the importance of it before anybody else. So I didn't want to let you get away without pointing that out.
Well, I appreciate that, but it takes a village, so I don't want to take credit. All I did was ask a question at the right time, I think. So another aspect of that meeting was the JTIQ study, and the information here is that they are wrapping up the technical components of the projects that have been identified. It's my understanding that report may be due out this week, maybe tomorrow, and then the other aspect of that is there will be a cost allocation discussion. It's been started, I think, sort of behind the scenes. It's going to come more front and center. I'm not sure when there is a meeting scheduled for that. The other thing that was informative to me, and again, I wasn't able to attend the meeting, but there were slides that addressed I can't remember if it's every 3 years. I believe it is that SPP and MISO essentially renegotiate the terms of their joint operating agreement. And there was a slide in the materials that indicated that they've made some inroads in smoothing out some of their interconnection processes, that it's gone through both stakeholder groups. And so they have some modifications they'll be making to the joint operating agreement, which they anticipate filing at FERC in March.
Sure, I just wanted to add one thing. Maybe I'm getting too in the weeds here, but it was really interesting to me because I've really been following this JTIQ planning process, and just for the other commissioners' knowledge, this is the process that they're looking at projects along the SPP MISO seam that could add capacity to help hook up additional generators, but also trying to consider whether there are economic benefits to customers' load that might justify customers paying for a part of these projects as well, that they wouldn't fully just be paid for by those generators, which in the normal course, you would just directly assign all the cost to the generators. But the one sort of interesting thing that came out of, I think it was the Seams Liaison Committee, was, I don't know if it was an admission or a revelation, that there are really two projects within this portfolio that they've developed where pretty much all of the benefits to customers' load are flowing from. And those are projects that were also identified in MISO's regional planning process, their long-range transmission planning process. And so there is a thought that those may get removed from this portfolio and built through that process. So it just leads me to wonder whether the cost allocation discussion, what that's going to be like in the future, because we were talking about having this big negotiation of, well, based on how much benefits flow to load, what should customers pay for versus what should generators pay for, what should MISO folks pay for versus SPP. It looks to, I'm sort of wondering if those projects, which compromised or comprised most of the benefits to load, and load being in the MISO area apparently, are removed, there may not be much of a discussion of what SPP load should pay for. So something to keep an eye on, but I thought that was an interesting development.
All right. Well, and there's details. I got ahead of my slide, but that's okay. That's okay. So there you go. We covered all of that, I believe. So we'll go to the next one. SPP West update. There's a DC ties task force that's been exploring transmission service rate design and revenue distribution for DC ties under the SPPO. And, to the extent that those ties are in existence, I don't know that there's really a lot that's being discussed about, I think, highway, byway for the most part. I mean, there are some issues that arise with those. And I think one of the topics that's been in discussion is how do you, congestion hedging and some of the market aspects of those DC ties. There's been discussion too also about, well, how will upgrades, what will the cost allocation for upgrades look like? So there's a lot of stuff that's under discussion right now. Most of it is just kind of tying down some of those, the details of the existing ties more so than anything else. And some of the market efficiency use of those ties. So the April 20 of 2022 is the date by which the expectation is that potential SPP West participants would execute the financial commitments to initiate the expansion of the footprint into the West, effectively creating an RTO West. Now, I don't know how the time frame for actually putting the RTO in place. Once that happens, once those financial commitments are made, they're also looking at, are there any additional changes that need to be made to terms and conditions? Are there tariff changes that are related to that? And so you've got to take a look at, they've got to take a look at some of that. And then there's a whole process that unfolds once that happens. So it's probably a year or two out. I mean, what you'll have a better idea if an RTO West is going to come into fruition, I think later this year, but the timing of that for implementation, it takes several months, if not almost a year. So I'm trying to recall when the IS integration took place. It seemed like it took a while. So script, this is just a reminder of what script was. I don't think script has been officially retired, but it's kind of the springboard from which the Consolidated Planning Process Task Forces has come from. So the recommendations from the script report had 35 recommendations and 11 sub-recommendations. And then you see the listing there for the Consolidated Planning Process Development and then Planning Process Improvement. And so that led to the task CPPTF, and that's to design and develop the Consolidated Planning Process and associated cost sharing mechanism. So they're composed of 12 members, including Commissioner French, and we know of one COG member for sure. I think they're trying to add a second one, and I think that's probably on the horizon. And I did not look at the membership roster for the rest of CPPTF, but they're composed of utility members and other members.
It's a pretty broad-based group. There's also members of the development community and the generator developer community.
Mhm.
And I would also just mention that the COG member that's on there now is Adam McKinney from Missouri, and he's excellent and has a lot of experience. So I'm happy to have him on there. A lot of the membership comes from the script, but we also have some new members. So we've been doing a lot of education to start off.
Is there a time frame on CPPTF?
Not that I am aware of. We are, I think it's one of those things where the consolidated planning process is a very ambitious project, and it's not going to happen for years, but even to make it happen within years, we need to be moving fairly quickly. But one of the constraints is that we have, there's a process that's already been put in place to clear the generator interconnect backlog. There's a generator interconnect backlog mitigation plan that's been filed at FERC. And that is sort of a prerequisite to putting in place a consolidated planning process. And that is probably not going to happen until, I think what I've heard is end of 2024. So no matter how fast we do this work, a consolidated planning process wouldn't be implemented until that 2024 timeframe at the earliest.
Okay, so I have a question. Isn't this consolidated planning process foundational to everything else that's going on? I mean, don't you have to have this figured out before, in a way, the other things can, I mean, they're just not tangential. They're integrated within. So I guess I'm not understanding how this process can, I don't want to say languish, but like you said, take a long time.
I think I agree, it's completely foundational. And it almost requires a clean slate, which is why I think it kind of has to come after you clear these other backlogs in the other planning processes. And then what we're trying to do is as we were saying, I mean, it's self-explanatory, consolidate all of the planning processes. Right now you have the ITP, which is your primary planning process, but you also have a separate parallel planning process to interconnect new generators, a process to interconnect transmission customers. And we want to get those all into one. But I think what we're trying to do is clear the decks so that we can get everything synced up and implement it all at once.
Okay, and the backlog is significant, is my understanding.
very significant.
And it crosses multiple generation types and, right?
It's primarily, right now it's primarily solar.
There's
but then
like 400.
still quite a lot of wind. I think I don't think I'm overstating it to say there's more generation in the backlog than generation online within SPP. Now, I don't think all of that will get built. A lot of clearing the queue is figuring out what's speculative and what folks actually are planning to build. So those numbers can sometimes be overstated, but there are a lot of projects potentially in the queue that we need to figure out what needs to be built and what's the most economical way to get it built.
Do you believe there's overtly dragging of the heels on the solar?
Now that I don't know, I think what's happened. Just I know this has been communicated, but just at a very, very high level, what has happened is we previously built a lot of backbone capacity and had a lot of extra capacity on the transmission system. A lot of generators were able to interconnect without much extra cost because there was all this extra capacity there. We've now basically used up that capacity. And so now as people get to the front of the queue, we look at, well, what cost are you going to have to be assigned to create, we're going to have to create more transmission capacity for you to build your project.
Right.
And the cost of building that is now very substantial, and it's more than any one developer can accept. And so as people are coming to the front of the queue, they're seeing how much it's going to cost to build the transmission necessary to interconnect their project, and they're dropping out. And so I don't know, I'm not attributing any malfeasance or anything. It is simply the process that we have and the fact that there is dwindling capacity, and we don't have developers that are prepared to pay the cost. And so you either need a new cost sharing mechanism or some new mechanism. And that's a lot of what FERC is talking about in this advanced notice of rulemaking. They're asking, should we reform the cost assignment mechanisms?
Okay, thank you for that additional discussion on this.
This is a recap of the action that the SPP Board of Directors took. They were the 2021 integrated transmission planning models were up for decision was up for approval. And there are two projects on that, one in North Dakota and one in the kind of New Mexico, West Texas Panhandle areas. This Crossroads to Phantom project is in the latter geographic area. And the board approved the 2021 ITP except for that project. There was a desire for some reevaluation of that. And so that'll come back, I think, in July, as I have note here. There was approval of the assessment report, basically saying this is just something that basically certifies that the ITP processes were, the assessment was done and completed according to the requirements. And so certifying those results essentially. Zonal planning criteria was a topic of discussion. That was approved by the board. The HITT C2 was approved. Storage as a transmission only asset was approved. And then there were several consent agenda items. They made some changes to the SPP bylaws preamble, and primarily, I think, to reflect how the board was represented on the strategic planning committee. I think there was a provision in there that said that the president of the board would serve on as chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, and I think they made some changes so that it doesn't have to be the chair that does that. There were revisions made to the joint dispatch agreement. I don't know the details of that. And then there was a discussion, there was a consent agenda item related to Neosho Riverton project and a cost estimate that was involved there that was approved as part of the consent agenda. And then I provided a slide here for FERC update, just because transmission is and interregional transmission and planning is a big topic of discussion in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And since we filed comments and reply comments and the RSC filed comments, I thought I'd put a kind of a placeholder slide in here and then ask Commissioner French. He's been actively involved in the FERC neighborhood task force, if he wanted to weigh in on from his first and second meetings.
Well, we're already kind of running long, so I'll be quick.
Yeah.
I think Sherry and I have another meeting to get to. At
Yeah, we
11.
do.
So just very briefly, it's just a reminder that we did file comments and reply comments in the ANOPR docket, and those are all publicly available. Nothing much more to comment on there. In fact, they kind of fall in line with other things we've talked about in this meeting. And then just a reminder that the FERC neighborhood task force is ongoing, and I am representing both the KCC and the MARC region on that task force. We had our second meeting in Washington, D.C. Last week. It all blends together now. This meeting was focused on both transmission planning, and we started to get into cost allocation. I would say that the two big items that I made a point of commenting on was recognizing that there are a lot of benefits to transmission, but I wanted to make the point to slow down just a little bit. I think there are some folks that want to start recognizing lots of new types of benefits in an effort to justify every single transmission project that could possibly be built. And I don't know that I'm in favor of that yet. I kind of like the fact that I believe there are a lot of benefits to transmission that we don't necessarily incorporate into cost benefit tests. But to me, that gives customers some element of cushion and some comfort, knowing that what we do build is likely even more beneficial than the test that justified it. And so I would like us to slow down just a bit on on trying to count every single benefit we can of transmission in the planning process. What I think is more important is to start breaking down the silos in the planning process, like we've talked about with the consolidated planning process that SPP is exploring, and the JTIQ process that they have ongoing, trying to identify more optimal projects that can efficiently meet multiple needs, get multiple parties to help in the cost sharing, and basically create a more efficient way of planning and funding our investments. That's where I would like to see our focuses be on. And then in the cost allocation discussion, they wanted some feedback from all the different regions on how it's done in ours. And I think SPP has a great story to tell, that it gives the states a lot of authority over that. And we've worked well together to reach consensus on how we'll share costs across our region. And so, I don't know that I would say that our mechanism or our methods are going to work for every single region, but they've worked well for us. And I think generally every region has come up with a mechanism that works well for them. And probably my recommendation to FERC would be to let each region figure that out for themselves, as they've allowed in the past. So that's about it for now. I know we're talking about more meetings to come. I think I would not be surprised to see FERC issue actual notices of proposed rulemakings coming up now that they've received all the comments from the advance notice of rulemaking, and those could be the topic of future transmission task force meetings to discuss.
I would
That's
just
all I have.
add, I would just add a comment. Based on what I heard, I do believe there is value to regionality. It does take into account differences across this nation. I'm glad you're sharing that thought process.
And that's my last slide. I think I have a question slide, but I think we've kind of covered questions as we go. But certainly if there is something that anybody has a question about or wants further briefing on, I'm happy to provide that information.
Sherry, I'll just say, and Chair Keen, I really do value and appreciate these quarterly updates. I think it's important for all of us to hear this together. So thank you for the work you do, but also in keeping us informed.
You're welcome.
Yes, indeed, Sherry. Thank you so much for your for your time, your efforts on our behalf, ongoing as it is. Very, very, very helpful.
And I'll mention, I try to thank you all the time, Sherry, but thank you from me as well.
You do. I feel appreciated very much so. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good. Commissioners, I believe this concludes our total agenda for this morning. Unless you have anything further that you would like to take up, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thanks again, Sherry. Take care.
You all.
You're welcome. Bye. Okay.